Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. We got the band back
Hello.
together.
All
Uh,
place for a change.
John is under a tornado watch, so if he suddenly blows away, thoughts and prayers, John. Thoughts and prayers.
Right. If you see the house spinning and
This week we are talking about how to get started with WebMCP. I feel like, Chris, this is something you've been working on for quite a bit. Trying to get working, in the sense of what you're going to show today. And if I recall correctly, I could be wrong, but if I recall correctly, basically a web MCP is for lack of a better term, a plugin that you install into your website that allows things to happen in an automated way.
That is part of it, yes.
Okay. Well, I'll take that I'm on the right track. I will take the win there.
Exactly. So we should probably start with a bit of history. MCP,
Okay.
which stands for Model Context Protocol, is a way for AI tools like Claude Desktop or ChatGPT or whatever to interact with systems outside of it. So if you've used Claude's connectors, for example, to talk to your Salesforce or your HubSpot, you're using an MCP. It's an API for AI, is the way we typically describe it. MCP servers have been around now for 2-ish years, I think, and they've been met with moderate success, mostly because they're a pain in the butt to set up. But if you get them working, it allows your AI tool to talk to all kinds of different systems, do stuff that it was never programmed to do in the first place by letting AI talk to those systems. WebMCP is a new specification that is in draft by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, promoted most heavily by Google and Microsoft to do the same thing for AI agents. So, Katie, you and I talked about this on this week's Trust Insights podcast, which you can find at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast. This is Agentic SEO, which is different than GEO or AEO or whatever, and different than AI visibility. Those are about, can we get AI to recommend your company? Agentic SEO is, can we get AI agents to work with your website?
And if I recall correctly, what we had talked about was, so it's the agents are now seeking out information on behalf of the end user. So I could send my Katie AI agent out to the web and say, sign me up for 6 newsletters that match my interests. But so now the agent has to go out and not only find the content, but then also have a place to go to actually do the signing up. And if that doesn't exist, then the content's great and all, but it's not going to be able to complete the task as I've asked it. So if I'm following the web MCP, I think the way that you described it in the podcast was it's sort of like putting an invisible app store on your website so that when these agents go out, it can say, yes, I want one of these, and 2 of these. Let me bring it back to my end user who's asked me to go fetch these things.
Exactly right. WebMCP tells an agent when it arrives, here's what's available. Here's what you can do. So if it were to arrive, for example, at the Marketing Over Coffee website, it would be given options like subscribe to the podcast or sign up for the newsletter or join the text line or any of those things. If it goes to the Trust Insights website, it would say search for blog posts or sign up for the Trust Insights newsletter or the podcast and so on and so forth. So that's the idea, is when an agent, and this could be anything. So this could be Claude Code, Claude Cowork. So Katie, you could take your Claude Cowork and say, I want more stuff in my inbox. Go find me stuff. And it searches the web regularly, which is still GEO. But then once it arrives at the Trust Insights website, it says, oh, there's a store here. What's in the store? And it says, there's the newsletter sign up. You know what? My user requested sign her up for newsletters. So I'm going to take advantage of this mini app here. Now, these are invisible to humans. Humans do not see these. This is solely by agents.
And that was one of my first questions to you was, am I adding a whole bunch of stuff to my website that humans aren't going to want to see or is going to be confusing? So when we talk about visibility to these large language models, there is visible content that we create both for the human and for the machine, but we've taught people how to add those disclaimers like this is for a large language model to read. And it's sort of that long list of things, those blurbs that we've added to our website. This, what we're talking about, the WebMCP, to your point, is different. It is not visible to the human. It's almost like the metadata in a way where you can see it behind the scenes, but as you're looking the user experience of your website, you don't necessarily see it. You have to seek it out from behind, the facade of, whatever the user is seeing. And we're using App Store as a placeholder proxy for what we're describing. There could be money exchanged, but we're really talking about things that your agentic system can do and essentially take off these invisible shelves and take action on. And so if those don't exist, then the agent is just doing essentially what, if you're using, Claude, the Chrome extension can do, which is basically just gather information and bring it back to you, but it can't do anything with it.
And so that brings us to the two components of WebMCP. There's two different APIs. One is called imperative, one's called declarative. Imperative is JavaScript. It is a JavaScript that you put on your website that when an agent arrives, and the script is programmed to recognize an agent by its user agent, it says, hey, I got stuff for you. And the agent immediately goes, oh, thank you for greeting me. Let's see what you got. Declarative changes the HTML on your website to tell an agent for things that you can't put JavaScript on. Here's what this is. So, for example, let's say you've got an old school contact form on your website, and maybe you're on a system like Astro, which is pure HTML, no JavaScript at all. You would use the declarative version of WebMCP to say, like, hey, agent, this is a form. The purpose of this form is to contact us. Here are the fields on this form. Using your browse on behalf, like Claude Cowork does, you can fill out the form this way. So to do a good implementation of WebMCP, you have to have both pieces so that one greets the agent if your website is a JavaScript-enabled site, and one modifies the HTML for websites that don't have a lot of JavaScript.
So it's essentially accessibility for agents.
Exactly. And on the declarative side, if you've done a really good job with like WCAG 2.1 implementation, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it will be trivial to add the declarative API because you've already done most of the hard work of putting out, like making sure every form field has an intelligent name on it, for example.
That's just good best practice anyway. That's just good governance. And it's something that we always come back to is if you have good, strong governance going into creating your website, developing your content, whatever it is you're doing, you're already ahead of the game. You don't have to recreate those things. It is always where you want to start is, do I have good governance? Do I have good naming conventions? Is it understandable by humans first? Because the likelihood of it also then being understandable by machines is going to be higher. So that way you're not reinventing the wheel. Before we go on, John, our silent partner, thoughts, questions, like, is this a new concept to you, or is this something that, you and Chris have been talking about on marketing over coffee, for example?
Yeah, no, we haven't kicked this around. I mean, because we've seen this stuff before. I mean, my flashback was to WSDL, like back decades ago, there was protocols that you would set up so that people could use an API so that they could hit it. So yeah, I'm used to this kind of stuff, but I'm just really interested in looking under the hood now. So JavaScript to do the initial thing, that's fine. You just grab that template and go. But I don't get the modifying the HTML and how that works. So yeah, I'm interested in digging in more to that to see exactly what the heck, how that happens. And then the other is, has it been compartmentalized? I mean, are there WordPress plugins and stuff for this, or do you just have to do this all manually right now?
Great questions. So to start, most CMS systems, including WordPress, have not built this in yet. In fact, it is in some ways so new. I had to have Claude write one for the Trust Insights website just so I could do this episode of the show and the live stream. However, it does work, and we'll talk about how to do that in a bit. The spec itself is available. The best version of it is available on Google's website. So Google has this in their Chrome developer system, the WebMCP, what it is, how the spec works, things like that. Now, this is something that's going to be very, very interesting. Chrome has said that it, as of version 146, WebMCP is supported. However, 149 is when they rolled it out to non-developers. So if your version of Chrome, and you could just go into the About menu and say, like, what version of Chrome am I on? I'm on 149. You have WebMCP available. Why this is interesting is because Google, and this made a whole lot of people very angry. Google has embedded a very bite-sized model of Gemini inside Chrome. It's called Gemini Nano. It's a 2 billion parameter model that does stuff like summarization and things. But guess what else it does? It talks to WebMCP. So even as you, the human, as you're browsing a website, Chrome might call its own internal model and say, hey, it looks like this is the Trust Insights website. It looks like they got a newsletter. Want me to sign you up for it? And it will, in a little sidebar, and it will fire off, and it can fire off and do that. So this is live as of Chrome 149, which is the current version. You can see on Google's chart here, in version 157 of Chrome, that's when everybody's going to get it, and it's going to be, you know, stock. It's no longer going to be in beta. And it will be the thing that will be built into Chrome. And so for all of us who are marketers, if we want Chrome, which is the #1 browser right now, to recognize our web MCPs, now is the time to implement it so that we have time to test it before it's turned on for everybody by default.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused though, because you just said that to date, no CMS system has WebMCP available.
Right.
So you had to build one. But Chrome is saying, yeah, go ahead. We can read it. But it's like, read what?
Right.
So I'm genuinely okay. So I just want to make sure I was fully understanding that there's a disconnect between what Chrome is saying it can access and there being anything accessible to Chrome.
Exactly. So
Okay.
Origin trial, the way I would explain this is Origin trial means everyone has access to it, but you have to turn it on. Shipping means everyone has access to it, and if you don't want it, you have to turn it off. So Chrome can, if you browse a website that has WebMCP, once 157 is out, Chrome will by default start to find it and tell you that it's there. Today, it doesn't do that. And to your point, Katie, because almost no one has implemented it, there's nothing to show.
Okay. That's so because I understand, you know, the phases of the roadmap. It was more, what is it even looking at if it doesn't exist?
Exactly. Very
Okay.
few sites have implemented it.
Okay.
Which means, you know, what was it from Margin Call? You can either cheat, be the smartest, or be first. It's easiest to just be first. So if you in your industry have the ability to turn this on in some meaningful way, to expose some meaningful functionality, you'll be able to test it long before your competitors do, assuming that they're not testing it, to see what things should we even make available. And B, Google has said that all of the agentic stuff doesn't impact search rankings, which I believe, because they're separate. But it doesn't mean that Google won't give it preference if it says, like, hey, if you're an agent and you're doing a Google search as an agent, here are sites that have WebMCP available that you might find more useful, because we can already see that in AI mode. It is an agent, right? It can go and read sites. So if WebMCP is there, AI mode might, this is pure speculation, might say, hey, WebMCP is available and it's our standard. You might get more benefit out of the site than the site that doesn't have it.
Okay. So I'm guessing the next step is you are going to show us what an MCP looks like, or
Sure.
what
So
it
we
is,
can,
or how to set one up, because like right now, and I feel like, so I was just looking, we have a ticker that says, you know, we are not lawyers. I feel like we need a ticker that says this is pure speculation. This is the way we think things are going to go, but don't come back to us if it doesn't work out this way.
So the first thing you'd want to do is you would want to install the WebMCP Inspector, which is a free Chrome extension made by Google that you install on your browser right now, so that it's like a debugger, but it's a debugger for WebMCP, so that you can see when you're trying to install it, is it even working? Is it there? Because remember, right now in Chrome, there's nothing to see, right? Because it's available, it's detected, but there hasn't been functionality built into the browser using Gemini Nano to say, like, here's what you can do. So I have mine installed. Let me go to the Trust Insights website. The moment I load the Trust Insights website, I see in the inspector, hey, WebMCP is on, and here are all the things that you can do as a user on this website. You can do things like search published posts and pages, public stuff. You can fetch a single published post. You can list items. You can return basic public information. You can let the most recent published posts. You can fetch a single author's posts. You can send a contact form message to contact Trust Insights. You can register an email address and subscribe to our newsletter. So all of these functions, the moment an agent shows up, it's given the menu and said, hey, here's all the stuff you can do.
Couple questions. I guess the first question, and maybe this is more of the concerned citizen question, is now that agents can access contact forms and fill them out, should we brace ourselves for an exponential number of spam contacts? And that's really going to mess with our overall analytics. Is it going to also mess with our analytics in terms of like sessions and users coming to the site if we can't distinguish if it's human or agentic?
You sometimes can, based on the browser agent, depending on how the agent is showing up. So if it's using an internal system like a headless Chrome, it will probably have a different user agent than an actual Chrome browser. But this is something that you would need to look in your server logs for. And if you have your own agents, test it out to see, like, for example, one of the things that you can do is you could put up a test script in PHP or TypeScript that is, on the back corner of your website somewhere, that says, when you browse this page, just print the user agent. And then you say, hey, Claude, go visit this page and tell me what user agent shows up. Or you use Chrome and it says, this is the user agent, just so that you can see what the different user agents are.
So it sounds like maybe a future episode of the live stream is how to set up your web analytics to account for all of this new agentic traffic and those kinds of things. So we can just sort of bank that in this idea. My other question is, and I think this is sort of what you're getting to, is, so you turned on Chrome's WebMCP, and then you went to the Trust Insights website and it's like, hey, you have an MCP to look at, which we started by saying most CMS systems don't have an MCP. And so this sort of brings us sort of full circle of, you've been building this to install into our website specifically, and that's why it's registering that there is a WebMCP. They need like less complicated names. WebMCP to look at, and that's, I'm following all of this correctly?
That's correct. I had to build a WordPress plugin, net new, to do this. And boy, did that take a few tries. And as a point of reference, you can do the same thing if you have access to a tool like OpenAI Codex, Google Anti-Gravity, Claude Code. The spec is fully available for free on Google's website under the Chrome developers. Download the entire spec, put it in your coding tool, and say, along with your best practices, your coding standards, and all of the other stuff, and have it build a plugin for your CMS. And here's the reason why it's not going to be as easy as just an out-of-the-box thing, because every website is different. So, for example, the Trust Insights website uses Gravity Forms for its contact forms. Gravity Forms is not a native part of WordPress. So our WebMCP plugin takes in the Gravity Forms endpoints and makes them available as WebMCP. If you were to install this on Marketing Over Coffee that doesn't have Gravity Forms installed on it, has WordPress Contact Form 7, you would need to change the plugin itself to work with that architecture. If you were using Sitecore or Ectron or the CMS of your choice, Adobe Experience Manager, they would all need to build their own WebMCP interfaces.
Do you, and this is again where we need the ticker of, this is just speculation. Do you anticipate that, I don't even know what it would be, I guess, the same way we look at connectors in something like a Claude desktop, or there was those N8N systems that had all the different connectors. Do you think as WebMCP becomes more commonplace, systems like that will have those different CMS connectors like an Ectron, like a Sitecore, like all the different ones you listed, versus having to build your own?
Yes. What I think will eventually happen is that you'll have a master WebMCP plugin and then have plugins for your plugin for the different systems. So if you have Gravity Forms, there's a Gravity Forms connector to your WebMCP plugin and so on and so forth. So there will be a bit of a land grab in the CMS world as to who can build the plugins the fastest to grab the market share for them. Which
goes back to, you need to have good governance around what it is you're already using. One of the things that we do with our clients is we audit their tech stack. And a lot of times they're surprised at things that exist in their tech stack. And so if you haven't done this recently, and I mean within, the past 6 to 12 months, and taken a look at all of the different tools you're using, now is a good time, even just to get a basic inventory of all of the different systems you have. So as these kinds of things roll out, and it sounds like it's going to be very, is for lack of a better term, nested, like a plugin for a plugin for a plugin. Like, you want to make sure you have a good understanding of what's going where, and not just turn on access to everything, because that could be very volatile or dangerous. Yeah,
very bad.
Don't do
that. So to show you what the plugin looks like, this is pretty rudimentary right now because I literally cobbled together for like 3 weeks and on Tuesday nights. You can turn on and off WebMCP. You have the rate limiting, and then you can choose which tools you want. So, for example, I don't want people to submit comments. Agents, take a hike. I don't want you writing comments on our blog.
Agreed.
But I can say subscribe to the newsletter, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's all these different things. This is custom to the Trust Insights WordPress. So I can't even put this on my own website because I would have to retune it for that particular site. Again, that will change as the standard evolves and things like that. But for right now, we at least have this in place and it's working. The one thing I'm going to add to it, which is I have on my own personal roadmap is integration with Google Analytics measurement protocol, so that when WebMCP is called, it sends a hit to Google Analytics to say, hey, I just got an agent visit. I want to log it as something different than a regular web visit.
Well, that goes back to my comment that a future live stream would be, how to basically reconcile your web analytics with these agentic MCP systems, because I'm already looking at this. I'm like, well, we probably want to make some sort of a notation and annotation in our data on the day that we turned on this ability, because we could see theoretically, hopefully, podcast subscribers grow, newsletter subscribers grow. And we don't want to be sitting there wondering, oh, what did we do? What happened? These are the kinds of things that you need to have those internal notes and have those notes available and accessible when you're doing your analysis, to make sure this is a big change in how traffic gets to your website and how conversions on your website happen. You want to be able to make sure that you can explain that. Like, it's great if things go up, but then people are going to say, well, what happened? What did you do? Do more of it.
Exactly. And one of the things that is worth pointing out, which a lot of people are very, very uncomfortable with right now, is when you look at what's happening on the internet, 58% of the internet usage on the planet now is machines. It's no longer humans, right? So humans are now in the minority. And so as you start to see mixed purpose agents or user action agents starting to visit more and more and more, you're going to want to know what kinds of agents are coming to your site and what it is that they're doing. So Cloudflare has already said you probably should have this in place sooner rather than later.
But again, you can have it in place sooner rather than later if you know how to build it in the meantime, waiting for these CMS systems to build their own that you can, if you look at like all the settings on the left-hand side, you can just flip it on or off. And so I find it interesting, sort of like the push-pull, like the supply and demand. It's like we're demanding that you have it, but there's no supply to meet the demand. Like it's basic business. So there's not for us to answer on this because we don't know why things take as long as they do, or if you should ever use V1 of something. The answer is no. It's interesting to me that Google is like, okay, so like everybody can access it, and it's like, access what?
Yep.
What am I doing? I know that AI is taking over web usage because everyone's turning to ChatGPT saying, give me a fish fillet recipe. And so that's your stand-in for web browsers now. I totally understand that, but like, we don't have the things we need to meet what they're telling us to do.
Right. Well, the vast majority of people do not. And that's why I said there is a potential early mover advantage here. This would be especially important if your site is any kind of e-commerce site where someone could make a transaction on your, so if an agent that has been authorized by you to make purchases on your behalf, having that there would be useful for that agent. So there are people, for example, who have set up OpenClaw and Hermes Agent and given it a budget and said, you can't spend more than this amount on a single transaction. But let's say you had a custom socks website and you had a special, a $13 pair of socks for, robot socks. If an agent dropped by there and said, hey, this looks like the kind of thing my user would like. My user said, I can't spend more than $50 on any one transaction. I can't spend more than $100 a day. I'll bet you they'd like this pair of socks. Buy. And the agent orders you a $13 pair of robot socks. Now, whether you like them or not, that's your problem. But an e-commerce site, at the very least, should have something like this to tell an agent, here's what is for sale. And ideally, surface things like search functionality on the site in an easy way for the agent to traverse the site and return results back to the hive, if you will, of what it found.
You're paying way too much for socks for something that doesn't have feet.
Other use cases would be agent-to-agent support. So the ability for your agent to talk to another support agent and the two of them negotiate something, and then like to basically say, hey, I will call you when I've actually gotten past their agent to talk to a human.
I can see how that's a powerful use case because I was trying to do this yesterday in reaching my insurance company for my car, and I couldn't get past the agents. They just kept giving me the same two responses. And I was like, I'm not asking for either of those things. And I couldn't get to a human. So like, I can definitely see that, but at the same time, it's very sci-fi. And, I think that, there's a lot of, I just want to acknowledge like with this, there's a lot of fear probably around like, what is it actually going to do? What is it doing on my behalf? Like, should I give it that much control? Like I'm giving it a $50 budget, but was I very clear about what I want? Am I going to get a bunch of inappropriate or unuseful things sent to my house? I don't know. I'm just going to make a quick, I have to do it. Get yourself set up, started with the 5 Ps, the 5P framework by Trust Insights. You can learn more at trustinsights.ai/5P-framework. Purpose, why am I doing this thing in the first place? People, who's involved, the human, and then also the agentic. Process, how is the thing expected to get done? Have I been clear with my standard operating procedures, with the details, with the directions, with the instructions? Platform, this is where your governance comes in. Only give agentic AI access to what it needs, not to everything. And then performance, can it complete the task? Did I do what I set out to do? Did I answer the question? I cannot emphasize this enough that you really want to make sure you're clear about why you're turning on a WebMCP before you turn it on.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of next steps, here's what I would do if I was the average site owner. Number one, I would make the site WCAG 2.1 accessible first. That's low-hanging fruit. There's proven tools, and there's a known benefit, which is 5 to 10% of people browsing the web are using some kind of low vision assisted tool. So by making your site fully WCAG compliant, you also make it easier for those people to do business with you, right? So that's number one. If you can do that first. Second, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
Second, implement the declarative API for WebMCP, which is where you take all the work that you did to make it accessible and just make sure it also conforms with the WebMCP declarative API, so that a browser agent, a web agent, or an AI agent can browse your site successfully and easily and know, like your form fields are not named form field 26, form field 27, the name, first name, last name, etc. That to me is the first two steps. And then the third step is, with the help of your coding tools and the spec that Google has published, which is available on their website, it's available on GitHub, build something that addresses the imperative API, which is the heavier lift. It's the app store. That's the order I would do things in, because the further along you go, the more kind of far out it gets. Like WCAG compliance is a no-brainer.
Is it fair to say that you can drop a link to that resource in our free Slack community, Analytics for Marketers, post live stream?
I sure can.
So if you want to link to the compliance that Chris just mentioned, what is it?
WCAG 2.1.
WCAG 2.1?
Yes, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
Got it. If you want to link to that and what that means, you can join our free Slack community, Analytics for Marketers, at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. I've heard you mention that on numerous calls, but having a resource to actually go to say, oh, what is this thing? What does this mean for me? Is probably really helpful for a lot of people, because it may be a brand new concept.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, but unfortunately it is for a lot of folks.
Dude, the thing I get wrapped up around, though, is also having a model baked into the browser now. So basically, you've got a model in the browser, and you've got sites there encouraging them to make a map that the model can hit. So you could, I don't know, is there any talk about how often that phone's home, or if that can be remotely fired?
So it's actually the opposite. So Google, if you go into your system settings inside Chrome, there's a little toggle button here to turn this on. And Gemini Nano will activate. It doesn't necessarily call home any more than the normal Google telemetry, because Chrome calls home all the time about everything. But this is actually intended to help Google offload some of the load on their servers by making your computer do some of the work. So in a lot of what they say about browser stuff, this particular model for on-device AI will help you do stuff like summarize web pages, organize stuff, because it's a small LLM. And so it's designed like, hey, summarize this page. It will do that, and it won't have to call to Google's cloud to do it and cost them money.
Right. Yeah. But they're farming that processing back to the desktop. Right. That's interesting to me that they can. And so I don't know. So that's off by default now. But is that as part of, once they reach version 56 or whatever it is, that will probably be on by default, I would imagine, at some point.
It's on by default now. They pushed it out, and it was a big outcry. People like, hey, was this 2 gigabyte file that just appeared on my website on my browser? Oh, that's the new Gemini Nano model.
Yeah. I got to hear all last week from my mother-in-law, who was visiting, about how every time she opens her pick a Google thing, there's AI trying to do something for her. And I said, you can turn that off, right? So I think that there's a lot of, to Chris's point, there's a lot of outrage of, what do you mean this is turned on by default? And yeah, you can just turn it off, but they don't make it intuitive to be like, hey, do you want to turn this off? Yes, no. You have to go find it in the settings and know what it is you're turning off. And then, if I remember correctly, they give you a little warning like, hey, if you turn this off, you don't get all the cool prizes.
Yep. Exactly. They actually have lots of documentation about what that system is going to do in terms of on-device AI. And the things that it's going to be able to do out of the box once it's fully live is summarize stuff. You can have it write stuff, rewrite stuff, proofread stuff, fill in stuff, and importantly, do stuff. And this is where WebMCP is going to, and the on-device model play together, is once it has the task API fully implemented, if I'm on a website like the Trust Insights website and the on-device model is on and watching everything I do, it will say, hey, you're here. Do you want to subscribe to this newsletter? And instead of you saying, yeah, I want to subscribe to go click, form, click, type my email, just it'll say, great, I'll take care of that for you. You can continue on with whatever you're doing. And so for us as marketers, we want to have that in place. We want to say to people's agents or even their browsers themselves, yes, come on in, sign your user up for our stuff. The user may not be thrilled, but this is why we're having the discussion about WebMCP today, because these APIs that are built into Chrome using its onboard AI are going to start, when it's available, to Katie's point, when it's available, it will start suggesting things. And so if you have Trust Insights and you have, I don't know, Acme Consulting Corporation and the users visiting both sites, if they visit ours and WebMCP is working and Chrome says, sure, I'll sign you up for, if you're trying to learn more about this stuff, maybe you came from an AI mode search, it will say, okay, I'll get you subscribed to the Trust Insights newsletter. Then you go to Acme Consulting, nothing happens. And so we might have a slightly better chance of converting that lead because we've gotten them sooner.
Interesting.
Right. Well, there's a long historical track record of, rolling out stuff Google suggests usually helps you out, in the long run.
So one of the things we said we were going to do on this episode was how to get started. Now, obviously, we're not going to sit and watch you for 3 weeks, develop against our WordPress site. Is it a good idea or a bad idea to open something like Claude Code and just say, hey, Claude Code, I want to build a WebMCP for my website, which is hosted on WordPress. Can you vibe code that for me?
Yes, with an asterisk. Let me walk you through the process that I went through. I went to Google itself and then 3 other AI systems that have deep research. And I said, do the research on WebMCP on what successful implementations look like and what the standard says on the most common use cases. And Alibaba Quinn, Perplexity, Gemini, and Claude were the 4 systems that I had put these reports together. From those 4 systems, I then said, okay, got it. Turn this into a product requirements document to build a WordPress plugin for my site. We are on WP Engine. We use Nginx. We are on this version of WordPress, which has this version of PHP. Based on, by the way, I also have a separate file of best practices for building WordPress plugins that I built the exact same research process. Claude Code said, got it. I'll read this plugin guide. I'll read this WebMCP guide. And I'll come up with a PRD, which contains user stories, technical requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, domain requirements, milestones, KPIs, and the 5P framework by Trust Insights. PRD is done. Then the next step is, okay, Claude, you've built the PRD. Now build the technical spec. So the PRD is sort of the why you do something. The spec is, what are you going to do? What are the pieces? So it then draws from the sources again, builds a full technical spec of the 11 pieces that this plugin is going to need to have. It writes that out. Then with the PRD and the spec in hand, I say to Claude, now build me a work plan with up to 10 phases of how you're going to build this sucker. And it walks through and says, okay, here's all of what I'm going to do. I'm going to do, these are my non-negotiable engineering standards. These are what I must do or what I must not do. And it runs through and builds the entire work plan. Then, and only then, do we say to Claude, okay, build it. And then for several hours, it's just going to go off and do the thing. But I had to do all the research first, do all the planning first, do the spec first, and then and only then can I vibe code.
So you answered the question incorrectly. So the answer was no. It was not a trick question. There was only one correct answer. The answer is no. But what you illustrated is what I was looking for is no, don't just open up Claude Code and say, I want to build a WebMCP against my my WordPress website. Go. You need to still do the planning. And so, Chris, what you mentioned is, again, the 5P framework by Trust Insights, which you can get at trustinsights.ai/5P-framework, because we're still talking about resource usage. We're talking about token usage. We're talking about spending money. We're talking about spending time. We're talking about introducing data privacy holes in your existing website. We're talking about misrepresentation of, whatever within the code to say like, hey, you can totally do that. Like, yeah, I'm totally fine if you spam 8,000 different websites and put my name and home address and phone number in the contact form. Like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Like, you want to make sure that you're not introducing those vulnerabilities. And so, no, don't just open up your coding system and say, hey, go do this thing. Do the research, build your plan. So a PRD is a product requirements document. A technical spec is technical specifications. 1,000,001 templates on the internet if you've never built one before. Like, just look those things up first and say, what do I need to do to build requirements so that this does not go off the rails? If you've never done software development before, there's plenty of resources for software development best practice. Find some that you like and then adapt it to what makes sense for you and your business. Do all of that first, and then you can do proper coding. It is no longer vibe coding because you have a plan.
Not only that, you just said something really, really important. And this is the watchword that I want everyone to pay attention to. When you hear the word web, the first thing on every checklist should be security. This is my own guide of the best practices. These are the things that go wrong the most when you're making a WordPress plugin. If you try to vibe code it, most of the tools will not think about security because it is not part of their mindset. So if you do not have checklists of this is what to avoid doing, you are going to vibe coding something dangerous. You're going to vibe code something that makes Swiss cheese out of your website's security, and someone can exfiltrate data from it. You have got to have this. So if you do not have a dedicated security section in your PRD, in your spec, in your work plan, in your checklists to validate that when the agent is done, stop immediately and make sure that you build them.
So how about as far as output then, once that plugin is run, is that dynamically generating the JavaScript file just every time it runs, or anytime there's a major site change?
So the way that I built the plugin is that it dynamically generates the imperative API for stuff that's site-wide, like, hey, subscribe to our newsletter and things, but then also gives options if it's relevant on specific pages.
Mm-hmm. And then for the HTML, there's no need for it to actually touch the posts and dig into the HTML.
So it will modify the HTML if you have things that are non-compliant. Like if you don't have ARIA labels on stuff, it will add them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, this is like it's touching all the parts and pieces. This can be very dangerous if you don't
yes,
have it set up the right way. Yes,
which means you, like Katie said, you have to do the 5P framework. And part of performance is security. So the axis that the 4-part we always say is it has to be safe, it has to be efficient, it has to be effective in terms of what it does, and it has to be fast. Those are the 4 dimensions that all code you have to figure out. And when you're talking to a coding agent like Claude Code, you say, these are your 4 objectives. You must meet all 4. You have to figure out how to do this.
Mm-hmm. But you should, as the human, have some semblance of what that looks like ahead of time. Because if you say, here are the 4 things you need to do, and Claude Code says, okie dokie, I'm going to go do them, and you don't know what's right and what's not useful, you could be saying yes to who knows what. So make sure you, the human, this is where human in the loop is so important, especially with these kinds of things, is you want to make sure you understand, even at a high level. So I couldn't list off all of the different ways that somebody could hack a website, but I know enough to take a look at, a security list and protocols and be like, yep, okay, that makes sense. Let me just research this a little bit deeper so I have good understanding. But like, I, as the human, can do that. I don't need to be an expert, but I need to have at least, sort of like we say about sports, like you should have at least a decent enough understanding of what happened in the game to have a casual conversation. You should probably at least know what two teams are playing, and that should get you far enough in the conversation.
And if you aren't sure, go to the Trust Insights website. We have the casino framework, which has nothing to do with gambling, but is a prompt research framework for deep research tools. Fill out the template, and then hand it to your favorite tool. And your context might be, I need to know how to secure a web or WordPress plugin. Hand the framework maybe even to your AI tool and say, help me fill this out to build a research brief, and then let a tool like Cowork or Code or whatever go and do the research. That's how I do stuff for things that I don't have strong domain knowledge myself. I will say, let's build this research brief. Ask me questions until you have enough information to fulfill the brief. It builds the brief, which is like this long. And then I go and hand that to all the different agents that pull in all the information, and then cross-check them and say, okay, well, what do they all have in common? What are the things that everybody agrees on? Like, yeah, you should always be escaping this type of HTML. Like, everybody says that. Like, okay, that has to be in the main rules. But that's how I built this thing, because I know that I don't know everything about WordPress security, but I know that AI can find it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, set your WebMCP agents loose on the Trust Insights website. I guess that's the next logical step.
That would be that would be the logical step. Would be deploy it and then test it,
yeah.
Please.
Yeah, don't skip the testing.
Yes, but I would recommend that if you are, to what John was saying earlier, rarely do you go wrong if you do what Google says. Just the way the world works. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to get concert and sports tickets via AI agent. This is my new thing. Look for John's Ticketmaster coming soon.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting use case, because for a lot of these things, like, you have to sit in the queue and keep refreshing or whatever it is. Like, yeah, that's a great use case to let an agent be like, hey, here's where I want to sit. Here's my budget. Go get me tickets. I don't want to sit in that queue.
Claude Cowork can do that for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about. Like, as the technology advances, I think my takeaway is that it's even more imperative to have a good handle on your security and governance before these things get too out of hand.
Yep. And then go do it. Go do it. Be early. Very rarely do you incur serious harm from being early, as long as you do the planning and governance up front.
Yeah, I was going to say, with that caveat.
Exactly. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks for tuning in. We will talk to you all on the next one. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.